presence in Russian mission control, observing the behavior of the crew. The 2007 arrest of shuttle astronaut Lisa Nowak revealed the limits of any psychological assessment program.
The astronauts go through a very detailed psychiatric and psychological evaluation at the time of selection. After those tests and interviews are done, they are reviewed by a panel of experts to make a recommendation to the selection board. And then finally, the psychologist panel staffs all those cases for what we would call suitability for short or long duration flights.
For the Mars mission, NASA is looking for new technology to prevent psychological meltdowns in space. David Dingus is a scientist specializing in facial analysis to detect stress.
Video is fairly unobtrusive. That means that we ask the question, how could video help us understand whether humans are being stressed in any context? And that was the platform on which we developed the idea of trying to use something called computer vision to track facial expressions of humans to detect when they are stressed by their performance demands. Lift your eyebrows as high as you can. Okay, try to form an asymmetry in your mouth. We see this a lot from subjects. He has a hard time doing it. He's very symmetrical in his face.
Commander Richard Irwin, Psych Assessment Report, February 2nd.
Specialized software examines facial movements, looking for telltale signs of emotional disturbance. Mission Control could use this information to medicate and, if necessary, restrain a mentally unstable astronaut.
So far, no knife fights.
Here you can see
Dr. Dmitry Metaxas helped develop the facial stress software for NASA.
We're into the science of quantifying why people behave the way they behave and how they express behavior. It sounds surprising why people from different countries and different genders exhibit stress the same way, because not all types of emotions are expressed exactly the same way. But in this case, the brain works similarly when it comes to stress situations.
NASA is a partner in the development of this stress detector technology, aiming to perfect it for the mission to Mars. Scientists in Russia share NASA's interest in facial analysis to identify stress.
То есть на лице человека вообще-то вот лежит.
A person's facial expression shows the psychological type of the person and his ability to cooperate. There are people who complement each other, and there are people who oppose each other. The model based on the phenomenon of facial expression allows us to determine psychological types of personalities.
Явления и модели и методов, которые у нас есть.
Stress is one problem. Boredom is another. The real Mars spacecraft will be largely automated. Unlike the science fiction version, there is no hologram deck, no alien ships to shoot at. The reality is, there will be little to do for 6 months.
There are some people who just are not psychologically suited for those periods of boredom. They would just go stark raving mad.
Then, it all changes once they approach Mars. Psychologists fear the astronauts may not be ready for it. They may suffer from a syndrome known as attention tunneling.
Often in heavily automated systems, you can go from prolonged periods of boredom to moments of intense performance demand very rapidly. And you want to train people to deal with those rapid transitions.
1979, 3 Mile Island Nuclear Generating Station in Pennsylvania. A faulty gauge leads plant workers to make the wrong assumptions while the reactor core is in full meltdown.
There has been a state of emergency declared on 3 Mile Island. Please stay indoors with your windows closed.
For 5 days, a nuclear fire rages out of control before engineers find the real cause of the problem. 3 Mile Island became a case study for attention tunneling. An automated system flung a bored team into action. Under stress, they made several critical mistakes that nearly cost tens of thousands of lives. The Mars crew will have no margin of error. If one of them makes a mistake, they will all die.
that's why we think for Mars the best thing is to have an automated piloting and landing system with the crew only intervening if there's something goes wrong. Try to avoid all those potential complications.
This raises a new question. How to train a crew to survive the psychological pressure of living with the constant fear of dying for 1,000 days. The Russian space station Mir has had its share of mishaps. The worst was in 1997, and it is an important lesson for the crew that travels to Mars. Mir commander Vasily Sibilia was at the controls when an unmanned cargo supply ship slammed into Mir. The collision punched a hole in the station's module, exposing the astronauts to the deadly vacuum of space. It took 2 hours to contain the problem. The whole crew was within moments of evacuating the station in escape pods. One of the Mir crewmen on that mission was so stressed, he had already decided to kill himself.
One of the cosmonauts, actually, Lazutkin, told me that on the 10th day, he decided to commit suicide because he couldn't stand it already. He went to a remote place in one of the modules, and before suicide, he decided to sleep.
The cosmonaut woke up and chose to live. On the journey to Mars, the fear of death will be a constant companion. From liftoff to splashdown, there are many ways to die. They will need to find a new breed of astronaut with better coping skills and different personalities. And they will all have to pull together as a team unlike any other crew in history. Their lives will depend on it. Sergei Volkov and Roman Romanenko, the cosmonauts chosen by Russia to go to Mars, must learn how to trust each other in a survival situation.
Вы должны прийти к цели вместе, никто не должен.
We start together and we should finish together, maintaining the best possible psychological microclimate in the team.
Микроклимат, психологическая обстановка должна сохраниться.
The Russians know only too well that pairing the wrong crew members could lead to tragedy. In 1982, Russian cosmonaut Valentin Lebedev sent a message to Mission Control.
If you don't bring us down to Earth now, I'm not going to work with this corpse anymore.
After 6 months in space, Lebedev was prepared to kill his fellow cosmonaut. Russian Mission Control talked him out of what could have been the first murder in Earth orbit. On a mission to Mars, NASA could face the same challenge. Since 1999, NASA astronauts have trained at the National Outdoors Leadership School in Wyoming. Here, the exploration generation of astronauts will learn how to deal successfully with conflict.
Expedition behavior is oftentimes wrapped up into a very positive personality, but positive expedition behavior also comes in the form of when people are willing to ask the hard questions.
Cannon Gator's favorite example is the crew of STS-107, the 7 people who would tragically die when the Columbia burned up in the Earth's atmosphere in 2003. Technical delays gave the astronauts 2 years to train together, longer than any other shuttle crew. In the Wyoming wilderness, they faced a problem. One crew member did not want to scale a mountain with the others. Then he changed his mind. He decided the good of the team was more important than his own desires.
So basically a group that's going to aggressively pursue the peak and a second group that's not so aggressively going to pursue the peak. That's one option. The other option is if we all just stay together as a group of 7 and do the best we can, go for the peak.
Here's a great example of positive expedition behavior shown by Mike Anderson, who said, I don't really want to climb, but for the team, I will.
Cannon Gator and his team have identified 4 personality types that would be ideal for a journey to Mars. The driver, the analyst, the motivator, the relationship builder. And all of them have to be team players, no cowboys. And there's no room for duplication.
On a trip to Mars, you're inevitably going to be faced with problems. If you've got the same thinkers, the same types of thinkers on the trip, you're going to run into problems pretty quickly.
The Russians are now ready to conduct a test on Earth to simulate the Mars mission. 6 volunteers will be locked in a small capsule for at least 500 days. Oxygen and water will be recycled. There will even be a simulated Mars landing and communications with the mock Mission Control Center.
Of course, we're also looking at the possibility of nervous breakdown in the conditions of spaceflight.
If someone snaps, the experiment can be canceled in a moment. There will be no such luxury in a spaceship, especially now as they face the most demanding and dangerous moment of their journey. About 6 months after leaving Earth, the exploration astronauts face the deadliest part of the entire mission, penetrating the Martian atmosphere and landing on the Red Planet.
To get a probe onto the surface of Mars is very challenging. We're batting about 500, roughly speaking, about 50-50. Getting a human onto the surface won't be any less difficult.
The crew has done everything they can to stay mentally and physically alert. They've trained and exercised, but they've also lived through radiation, weightlessness, and the psychological pressure cooker of isolation and confinement. And now, the moment of truth.
You simply want to survive. Of course it is nerve-wracking to face the uncertainty, whether everything will function well, whether you will live.
Going from Mars orbit to the surface has been called the 6 minutes of terror. On the surface, there will be no waiting rescue crew, no medical team.
If you've got astronauts who are not in the peak of condition, then you may have an unsuccessful mission right at the very end where they need to be, at their prime.
To solve the psychological risks of the manned Mars mission, some discoveries still need to be made on Earth. In 2006, NASA conducted an 18-day experiment in its undersea lab called NEMO. 15 meters long, just 4 meters across, NEMO is an underwater analogy for the Mars craft. For this mission, NASA installed cameras and microphones to observe stress levels in the crew. This data was fed to Mission Control for real-time observation. The computers are an early warning system for mental crisis, triggering treatment for a stressed-out astronaut, or in the worst-case scenario, restrainment. As the NEMO project pushes forward, NASA seeks crews which come equipped with their own problem-solving skills. Unlike Apollo 13, there will be no Houston to instantaneously deal with deadly problems.
I'll get my turn in the driver's seat.
NASA is also experimenting with artificial intelligence as companions for the mission to Mars.
Continues to challenge Rick.
Each astronaut might have a custom-designed AI companion to talk to when human interaction becomes too volatile. It's a start to keep astronauts distracted from the day-to-day rhythm of life in space. Finally, experts in both Russia and the United States are looking for ways to pinpoint the ultimate crew for the exploration generation. No adrenaline junkies, no space cowboys, only team players who respond well to structure and can think outside the box in moments of crisis.
It's hard to say what awaits us on Mars if we go there, but this training is a way of developing skills to face any extreme conditions anywhere.
Отработка навыков по выживанию в любой местности.
Mission planners, ground control, and billions of people on Earth will wait anxiously to see if the first humans to travel to Mars will make it safely to the surface.
25 meters.
Will they successfully push their way through the 6 minutes of terror, or will they perish unseen, millions of kilometers from home? Develop the facial stress software for NASA.
We're into the science of quantifying why people behave the way they behave and how they express behavior. It sounds surprising why people from different countries and different genders exhibit stress the same way, because not all types of emotions are expressed exactly the same way. But in this case, the brain works similarly when it comes to stress situations.
NASA is a partner in the development.
Could video help us understand whether humans are being stressed? in any context. And that was the platform on which we developed the idea of trying to use something called computer vision to track facial expressions of humans to detect when they are stressed by their performance demands. Lift your eyebrows as high as you can. Okay, try to form an asymmetry in your mouth. We see this a lot from subjects. He has a hard time.
Presence in Russian mission control, observing the behavior of the crew. The 2007 arrest of shuttle astronaut Lisa Nowak revealed the limits of any psychological assessment program.
The astronauts go through a very detailed psychiatric and psychological evaluation at the time of selection. After those tests and interviews are done, they are reviewed by a panel of experts to make a recommendation to the selection board. And then finally, the psychologist panel staffs all those cases for what we would call suitability for short or long duration flights.
For the Mars mission, NASA is looking for new technology to prevent psychological meltdowns in space. David Dingus is a scientist specializing in facial analysis to detect stress.
Video is fairly unobtrusive. That means that we ask the question, how I'm doing it. He's very symmetrical in his face.
Commander Richard Irwin, Psych Assessment Report, February 2nd.
Specialized software examines facial movements, looking for telltale signs of emotional disturbance. Mission Control could use this information to medicate and, if necessary, restrain a mentally unstable astronaut.
So far, no knife fights.
Here you can see
Dr. Dmitry Metaxas